Hey guys, what's going on? James here, and in this video today, we're going to be talking about all the players that were cut for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to get their roster down to 53 players. Now, I have, I think, 4 videos coming out tonight for this YouTube channel. Possibly, this is the first one talking about the players who were cut to make the initial 53-man roster. I'm then going to have a separate video talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' initial 53-man roster itself and all the players who have made it. I will then have another video talking about all the players who are now signed to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers practice squad, and then I should have one more video talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers initial depth chart that was released today as well. So a lot of content coming out here on the channel. I'm not combining all of it because, quite honestly, I wouldn't even know what to title the video, so I figure I'll just make 4 separate videos covering each and every topic and giving it enough amount of time for each and every topic. And yeah, that's just how we're doing things. So yeah, let's get started here with some of the moves that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers made to get down to that initial 53-man roster. I have the moves right down here. I also have some names over here. We will talk about those in a little bit. But the first player released, Kyle Love. Pretty surprising in my opinion. I thought that he was going to be making this 53-man roster over Khalil Davis, but a lot of you guys told me in the comments section that you all felt that Khalil Davis was probably going to be making it over Kyle Love. Smart move, because hey, that's exactly what happened. You guys got me on that one, but Kyle Love could be brought back on the practice squad somewhere down the line here, especially with 6 of these practice squad spots having their restrictions lifted, I guess I should say, and they now have the ability to place 6 veterans on the practice squad, regardless of how long they've been in the NFL for this upcoming season, so we might not have seen the last of Kyle Love. A couple of things I do want to note over here is AQ Shipley was released on Saturday, but then you can see right over here he was re-signed on Sunday. It was just kind of a workaround to put some guys on IR. I can't really explain it that well, but it was a workaround to make sure that they didn't have more players susceptible to the waiver wire system. That was just kind of their workaround for that. They also placed Justin Evans on the physically unable to perform list, which means that he will not be able to play for the first 6 weeks of the regular season, I believe, and then after that, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have to decide whether or not they're going to activate him or place him on the injured reserve. And if Justin Evans does not get healthy in these next 6 weeks, it's going to be a pretty grim outlook for, I don't think just this season, but his NFL career as a whole. So I'm definitely, praying for Justin Evans, and hopefully he can get healthy as soon as he possibly can. But let's start talking about some of these players that were waived. First one, Zack Bailey, was pretty surprising in my opinion. I thought that the love he got from Bruce Arians and the coaching staff last offseason was going to carry over in a big way this offseason, because he was basically all set to make the 53-man roster last year, but he did get hurt and was eventually placed on the injured reserve. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers waived him. They had some other pretty interesting younger guys who did end up making the 53-man roster, and we will be talking about them here towards the end of this video. But Zack Bailey was one of these players cut. Raymond Coleus was another player cut, the 7th-round draft pick made in this most recent NFL draft. He was picked up very, very quickly by the Los Angeles Rams. The Buccaneers had actually planned to place Raymond Coleus on the practice squad, but instead he is signing on the Los Angeles Rams 53-man roster. So shout out to him for that. He should be a pretty darn useful weapon for Sean McVay over there in Los Angeles. Kazin Daniels was another player that was released. I know a lot of people very much love his story and how he is blind in one eye after a horrific accident, and he has definitely been an overachiever, not just in college, but coming into the NFL as well. He definitely had a really cool story last season. He was given a couple of chances. I know a lot of people were rooting for him. He was brought back for this offseason as well, but unfortunately he did not make the cut. Noah Dawkins was also waived. He was an addition from very late last season off the Cincinnati Bengals practice squad. He was basically a special team guy towards the end of last year, and he had a little bit of a shot, I guess you could say, in this offseason to maybe do something. I could also see him potentially being brought back on the practice squad as well. Michael Divinity was released, which was very, very, very upsetting for me. I had him making this 53-man roster, and I had very big plans for Michael Divinity in my mind. I thought that he could be be a very sneakily good pass rusher for this team. I don't think that he is potentially done here with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm not sure if he's signed with another team's practice squad, but if he hasn't, he's definitely somebody who I could see somewhere down the line, either A, coming back to the Buccaneers practice squad, or B, definitely coming to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 53-man roster if an injury or something like that occurs. But Michael Divinity, I still have a lot of hope for him in the NFL. Next player waived was Dakota Dixon. A little surprising on this one. Bruce Arians essentially said that he was going to be a starter last season had he not got hurt, so I thought he definitely had a pretty strong chance to make this 53-man roster, but that was not the case. Dakota Dixon was released. Now, he did get brought back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers practice squad, and I will talk about that in a separate video, as well as guys like Zack Bailey and other players who were signed to the practice squad, but Dakota Dixon, he is not on the initial 53-man roster. Center Anthony Fabiano is another player who was released. Simply put, when the signing of A.Q. Shipley was made, that was basically it for the backup center role. There was literally going to be nobody, in my opinion, who was going to be beating out A.Q. Shipley for that backup center job, simply because he knows Bruce Arians' system. Bruce Arians was A.Q. Shipley's head coach for, I believe, 3 or 4 years with the Arizona Cardinals, and unfortunately, Anthony Fabiano just can't pick up, he can't do enough in this short amount of time in these circumstances to really go and cement himself as a potential candidate for that backup center job. So I think that guys like Anthony Fabiano and basically a lot of these guys were just victims of circumstances in the current world that we are living in right now. So that was pretty unfortunate. Big one, Matt Gaye. We already made a whole separate video talking about the release of Matt Gaye and the entire kicking situation that's been going on for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Matt Gaye was a 5th-round draft pick for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last offseason, and he is now off of the team. Unfortunate, but I don't think we've seen the last of Matt Gaye here in the NFL. Cyril Grayson was also released. I definitely love this guy's speed. He is a former sprinter back in college, I believe. He spent time on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers practice squad last season with Jadon Mickens. Shout out to him. They definitely got a lot of work done, and I thought that he could have something. I believe he also might have played in a regular season game, week 17 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last season. I'm not 100% unsure of that, but I'm pretty sure. So very interesting to see him get waived there. Javon Hagen was also released. Shout out to Joshua Allen of the Audible from Bucs Report, by the way, who has been able to interview Javon Hagen. If you guys haven't seen that interview, definitely go check that out. But another young safety who unfortunately was just caught up in way too much competition in that position group with so many high tier draft picks made in that grouping. Javon Hagen just couldn't hang, unfortunately. Tanner Hudson was also released. I know a lot of people are fans of Tanner Hudson. Shout out to my good friend Billy, who is also a subscriber here on the channel. Tanner Hudson, I think, has some very good ability as a receiving tight end, but with O.J. Howard, Cam Brate, Rob Gronkowski, and Anthony Auclair already on this roster, it was just too much. You're not going to keep 5 tight ends, and Tanner Hudson was unfortunately a casualty of that very deep position group. Jeremiah Ledbetter was another player that was waived. This one very much hurts me. I'm a huge Jeremiah Ledbetter fan. I think that he definitely has some ability and can be a very high tier backup in the NFL, potentially even a fringe starter. You guys know I love that term, and I'm very happy to see that he did end up back on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers practice squad and hopefully still has a future with this team. Next player waived, guard Nick Levert. Don't know much about him, but I will say with guys like, Zack Bailey getting released, guys who had a lot of praise last offseason were getting waived. I didn't have a lot of confidence in a guy like Nick Levert, unfortunately, but, hopefully he can still end up on a practice squad. It looks like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did sign him to theirs, so maybe he still does have some type of future here with the team. Next, tight end Cody Mcelroy, who had I believe a 30-yard grab in the final game of last season, which was pretty interesting. Same case for a guy like Tanner Hudson, just way too deep of a tight end group. You then move on to cornerback Herb Miller, who was doing some interesting things, but much like the safety group, much like the tight end group, this cornerback room is very solid, I guess you could say, solidified in terms of who's at the top and, who the backups are. There was really only one cornerback position available this offseason, and even going as far back as MJ Stewart getting waived, it really felt like, anything could happen in terms of who was going to get that last cornerback spot, and it did not go to Herb Herb Miller. Moving on, wide receiver Bryant Mitchell, who is one of my personal favorite kind of under the radar wide receivers. I remember him from a year or two ago when he was making plays during training camp and overall doing some pretty underrated things. He does not make the cut here. It was a very strong competition, I feel like, for those 5th and 6th wide receiver spots. And, Bryant Mitchell unfortunately didn't make the cut there. Could be brought back to the practice squad somewhere down the line, or could end up on another team's practice squad. Another big surprise, Dare Ogunbowale. We already talked about this one in a separate video as well. Dare Ogunbowale did end up signing with the Las Vegas Raiders, I believe. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments section below, but shout out to Dare Ogunbowale. I thought he could potentially go to the Jacksonville Jaguars, but that is not the case. He looks like he will be going to the Las Vegas Raiders. Wide receiver Josh Pearson was also released. Again, just a very, very deep position group there at the wide receiver core. Josh Pearson was just simply beaten out there. Defensive lineman Benning Pote was also released. This one, much like what I talked about with that cornerback room, this backup defensive line group was pretty much solidified. There were some surprises, such as Jeremiah Ledbetter getting released. That was certainly a surprise to me. But, Raheem Nunez-Roche already had one of those backup defensive lineman spots locked down pretty much completely. Then you also got to factor in Khalil Davis and him being a draft pick. And then finally, that last spot I feel was definitely up to either, I want to say Jeremiah Ledbetter or the guy who ended up getting the job, Patrick O'Connor. So unfortunately, there just wasn't a ton of room for a guy like Benning Pote. Next is another pretty decent surprise, inside linebacker Chappelle Russell, who was just drafted in the 6th round of this most recent NFL draft by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was beaten out by Jack Sitchie, which in my opinion was pretty surprising because I'd been hearing some pretty darn good things about Chappelle Russell and his overall play during this training camp, but much like what I've been saying about some of these young guys, it was just a victim of circumstance. There wasn't enough time. These young rookies and undrafted free agents, they didn't have OTAs, they didn't have mini camps, they didn't have preseason games, they didn't have a lot of time or a lot of chances to go out there and show what they could really do. I still think Chappelle Russell can be a very good player for this team, and I still have a pretty decent amount of faith in him. He is back signed to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers practice squad, so maybe he can be something in the future. I really am hopeful, and I think that if he is given more of a chance here later on down the line, we could see him back on the Buccaneers 53-man roster. Another player released, Spencer Schnell. Snelly was released yet again, which really does suck. He was released, I believe, late last month in the month of August, and he is released yet again. It's unfortunate. I really hope Snelly lands on his feet somewhere. Then you have center Zack Sheckleford, who I am, pretty not excited about, I guess you could say, as a player. I know that's mean, especially in terms of me trying to be optimistic as much as I can be with players, but I just remember seeing Zack Sheckleford at center during the East-West Shrine Game practices and not being impressed, but it seems like he's impressed the Tampa Bay Buccaneers enough for the fact that they brought him back on the practice squad, so shout out to him there. Finally, the last two guys who were released, Reed Sinnott and Mazzy Wilkins. Both of these guys were waived, but I believe they were both brought back on the practice squad, which is very, very interesting. Reed Sinnott, I'm a big fan of his. Hopefully he can be something at the quarterback position, and then also Mazzy Wilkins. I think that he definitely had that 5th cornerback spot locked down until Parnell Motley came along and just blew everybody's expectations out of the water by having an amazing training camp. Unfortunately, it was just too much for Mazzy Wilkins to compete with, but I definitely don't think that he is going to be done with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I could see him ending back up on the Bucs 53-man roster or ending up on another team's 53-man roster with relative ease. Reed Sinnott, by the way, was signed to the practice squad, but I believe he was just released due to the signing of Josh Rosen to the practice squad. So Reed Sinnott, best of luck. Hopefully he can end up on another practice squad as well. But yeah, guys, that's all the players that were waived to cut the roster down to 53. You can also see right here, John Hurst, the wide receiver, and guard John Molken were placed on the injured reserve. Now, I know that the media has been calling it a minor injured reserve, which means that you can bring them back after 3 weeks. I don't think that these two guys are going to be brought back. I think that they're going to be waived with some type of injury settlement and may end up on another team's practice squad, much like what happened to Jeremiah Ledbetter last season. I believe he ended up on the Ravens practice squad, but then he was eventually brought back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I could see a similar thing happening with John Hurst and John Molken, although I could potentially see John Molken being, brought back to that 53-man roster in place of another guard potentially. You'll just have to wait and see on that. But The Tampa Bay Buccaneers also did make the signing of Leonard Fournette official. You'll love to see that. And over here, we have some of the names who were definitely kind of surprises in terms of making this initial 53-man roster. Guys like Parnell Motley, the cornerback who I mentioned, who just had a phenomenal training camp. Patrick O'Connor, who did end up beating out Jeremiah Ledbetter, was very surprised about that. I have dubbed him the Viking. If you don't know why that's his nickname, just go look up a picture of him. You will completely understand why. Aaron Stinney, who definitely has a lot of versatility as a guard and can play a little bit of center as well. I was personally pretty surprised to see that he made it. I definitely thought that John Molkin was going to make it, but he was placed on the injured reserve. We'll have to see if Aaron Stinney can stick back on this 53-man roster once John Molkin is healthy. Jack Sitchie made it over Chappelle Russell. That was surprising to me. I thought that Jack Sitchie was definitely a strong candidate for the practice squad, but they opted to put Chappelle Russell on there instead. Ryan Suckup made it the kicker position over Matt Gaye. I've already talked about that. That is going to be a very, very interesting situation to keep an eye on. Cam Gill and Quentin Bell made it as backup pass rushing linebackers. Shout out to those guys. Quentin Bell is most famous so far for injuring TJ Logan in practice, which resulted in him being placed on the injured reserve. And I know that Quentin Bell did not mean that, but it still is just an unfortunate thing to see. But both those guys have a lot of speed, have a lot of flashy ability as pass rushers, and seem to be doing a really, really good job on special teams. And then finally, two favorites of mine. Andrew Adams made it at the safety position. That was one I was happy with to see because I predicted him to make this 53-man roster, and I'm a very big fan of Andrew Adams. He's where I basically, talked about the term fringe starter. That's where it started, was with Andrew Adams a couple of years ago when he was getting signed to the team. I've been calling him a fringe starter for years now, and I still believe it, darn it, so I'm still holding out hope for Andrew Adams. And then finally, Jadon Mickens. I'm always rooting for Jadon Mickens. It's just always going to be that way, because I'm biased. He's a friend of the channel. He's my first interview ever on this show for a Tampa Bay Buccaneers player, and I'm just happy to have him be on this 53-man roster, as well as being the starting kick and punt returner for the team. But yeah, guys, that's it for this video. Let me know what you think about all these players waived down in the comments section below. Which ones do you agree with? Which ones do you disagree with? And were there any surprises that you guys saw with this cut down period this past weekend? But yeah, guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Hope y'all enjoyed. Now we'll see you in the next video or the next live stream. But until then, and as always, guys, goodbye for now, and go Bucs.